Hello everyone, we're here again and we are going to do science. And this time we want to look at some skills that are needed in science. We'll start with looking at the fact that there are many skills that we need as scientists, as engineers, as technologists, or even doctors. You must engage in these skills and practice them so you become very conversant with them, and then you can comfortably use them. For us here today, we want to look at observing, grouping or classification, and measuring. Let's begin with observation. Observation consists of receiving knowledge of the outside world through our senses. And we have 5 basic senses: the sense of sight, taste, sound, touch, and smell. Now, these senses help us a lot in being aware of our surrounding, in helping us to observe things that happen in our surrounding. Since you've done this a long time ago, here is a little exercise that says color and match the 5 senses. So we have taste, touch, hear, smell, and see. And then we have the different body parts that are engaged in that. So your task is to match each of these organs with the sense that they help us to perceive. So in the picture at the top is the ear, next is the tongue, the eye, the hand is representing the skin for thought, and finally you have the nose. Later we'll check this exercise and see how well you have done. Another exercise that is here, it says you simply look at the picture and you are to name the sense organs, the 5 sense organs. I will not say the names, but you can see the first one here is pointing to this part of the body. The next one is pointing to this one. And this is pointing here, and this one, and that one. So your task is to name this, the senses that these body parts help us to perceive. Observation also consists of recording information using scientific tools and instruments. Any data that is recorded during an experiment can be called an observation. So examples of some things we record. For example, you measure the temperature of something and you record that temperature, that is an observation. Or you're measuring the length of something and you record it, that is also part of observation. Observation can be quantitative. That means you can measure them or you can count. Or qualitative. Now, these are things that cannot be measured. There's no way you can count them. But let's look at the example given for qualitative: color, taste, and smell. Now, these are things you cannot measure. You cannot say the smell of this, it is this number or that number. You can only say it is strong, it is soft, but you can't put figures to it. The same thing with color and the same with taste. But when you come to quantitative observation, these are things that you can count, things that you can measure. If you're measuring the temperature of something, for example, the human body, you will say it is 37 degrees Celsius. Or you are counting number of cars that are passing within a specific time, you will say, I was able to count 50 cars in 1 minute. So that's the difference between quantitative, something you can measure, and qualitative, things that you cannot measure. Both of them are observations. Now, here is a picture of 2 people. It says which of these 2 in the photo is the taller one. So take a good look at the 2 of them. And now it says if you said that the lady is taller than the man, so that will be a blank observation. So let's take a look at the picture again. What observation will you say is that? Is it quantitative or is it qualitative? All right, I'm not going to tell you the answer. I'll leave it for you to think about it. And towards the end of the lesson, we will work out the answer. Another one, there are 3 pieces of cassava in this photo. What type of observation are we making when we say there are 3 pieces of observation? Are we making quantitative, that is something that can be counted or measured, or are we making qualitative, something we cannot count? So again, that one will leave for you to look at. So classifying or grouping things is another skill that is needed in science. When objects are classified, they are simply put into a group with other objects that are similar to them. So when we talk about classifying, it simply means we're looking at things that are similar, we place them in one group. Things that are not similar, we have to move them from that group. So for example, these things have some things in common. A boy, a flower, a dog, a young plant, a tree, a butterfly, they all have some things in common. So we classify or we group them under living things. On the other hand, if we look at the picture on the right of the board, the books, the beakers there, the picture of the globe, the pencils in the container, the dress, and the gears, they also have something in common, and which is different from what these ones have in common. So this is one way we can sort things out. You can see we've put all these things on one end, and we call them non-living things. Why? Because they don't have the characteristics that these ones have. So classifying materials, we can also look at non-living things. We know matter is all around us. Substances can exist in any of the 3 states of matter. That includes solid, liquid, and gas. So when you look at non-living things, one way we can group them is to look at the state in which they are. If you recall, solid, that is wherein the particles are not moving, they are in one position. The liquid, the particles are changing position slightly, and then the gas, the particles, we say, are free to move. So here we have water in 3 states. Let's look at the first picture near to me. We have a cold drink in solid and liquid state. So the eyes representing the solid, and when you put that in your drink, it's still going to remain as a solid for some time, and then gradually it will become a liquid. But the fact is, we have a solid, we have a liquid. These are 2 different states of matter. And if we come here, that's tea in the liquid state. All right, and finally, we have steam coming from the kettle as a gas. So these are the 3 states of matter demonstrated here: solid, a liquid, and the gas. So also, we do classification of living things. Now, all the living things in the world, to make their study easier, we try to group them. So we have placed them into big groups that we call kingdoms. So first, next near me on the left of your screen is the kingdom Monorange. That is where you have bacteria. And the next to it, you have the kingdom Protista. Protista is where you have those small organisms that have similarities to plants and animals. You have those like the amoeba that is very similar to animal because it does some things that animals like moving around. And then you have others that are plant-like, so they fall under the kingdom Protista. Another big group is the kingdom Fungi. Now, fungi is a special group that has some plant characteristics in the sense, for example, they don't move, they have things that resemble roots, and but then when you look at what plants do, for example, plants make food. Fungi, they don't do that. In fact, they depend, just like the other groups, they depend on the plants for the food that the plants make. And finally, we come to the plant themselves, kingdom Plantae. That's where you have all this big group of plants, which later on we are going to look, because it's a very large group and has to be divided into smaller groups. And the animal group is the kingdom Animalium. Again, that one needs to be subdivided so that our study of the living things will be easier for us. So let us look at them briefly. The kingdom Monera, that's where you have bacteria. Protista, that's where you have amoeba and the paramecium. Fungi, you would have mushroom and others there. Plants, we know a lot of plants like fan and then this beautiful flower. And the kingdom Animalia, you have the lizard and you have a fish. So this is the way living things are grouped. Monorange, looking at each of the groups now. Monorange, we say they are a group of one-celled organisms that do not have a nucleus. So they are actually one whole organism, but they are made up of just one cell. I mentioned before, bacteria is a typical example. Under very powerful microscopes, this is what the bacteria will look like. And here is a simplified drawing of the bacteria to show you the structure of the bacteria, what it is made of. And of course, you have bacteria in different shapes, different appearance, and so on. And we move on to the protists. We say they are also a very big collection of microscopic and unicellular organisms. Now, this group, they're actually made up of a complete cell in that they have the nucleus, the cell membrane, and the cytoplasm, unlike the bacteria that don't have nucleus. But then you have, again, different groups here. So taking a look at them, we have some examples, and more common examples like the bacteria. We have the euglena, and then we have paramecium. These are things probably you've been looking at. They all fall under the group that we call protists. Now, the protists, what is interesting about them is that some have similarities to animals, like the paramecium, the amoeba, because one, they don't make food, and they simply feed on others. There are other organisms like the euglena and this other guy here. You can see they're green, and they can actually photosynthesize food. But this one is very interesting because it's having animal characteristics, like having a whip here so that it can move in water, and it's also able to digest or take in food and break them down. But also, in the absence of food, so long as there's sunlight, it's capable of making food for itself. The fungus group, or the fungi group, the plural is fungi, and some now accept funguses. In the past, it used to be just fungus and fungi, singular fungi, plural fungi. Fungus is singular, plural fungi. It's any of these group here. We describe them as eukaryotic cells, organisms, meaning they have true nucleus. And you have some that are microscopic, like yeast and the mold. And you also have the bigger ones. There's mushroom. These are all fungi. You have rhizopore, which normally will grow on bread mold. And when bread is getting bad, you have mold there. And here is a picture of what it will look like under the microscope. So if you take a pinch of this mold here and you look at it under the microscope, you'll be able to see the fungi better. So this is the other group, the group fungus or fungi, and these are the members. So next we are looking at the plants, kingdom Plantae. Plants are multicellular. We will talk more about those ones later, unicellular and multicellular. But plants, all plants are multicellular organisms, and what unites them is the fact that they carry out photosynthesis, and of course they are eukaryotic organisms, which means they are able, they have the true nucleus. So different plants, okay, there are some that are familiar, the sunflower, the rice, the mango, I'm not so sure about these two, but they are all plants. So again, we'll try to look at more when we get to the plant kingdom. And finally, we have the animal group or animalia. These are living organisms that what unifies them is the fact that they feed on organic matter. That is, things that are actually made by plants. Typically, they have sense organs. We looked at some before. Like if you look at this guy, they have the ear for hearing, the eye for seeing, the nostril for smelling. In the mouth, you have the tongue for tasting, and the skin itself for, perceiving touch, temperature, and other things. And the most interesting thing about animals is that they have a brain, which helps them to be intelligent, and so animals are able to do a lot of things that you don't see the other organisms being able to do. So this is how we classify living organisms. So we come to the next scale, which is measure amount or degree of something. So we measure things so that we can get correct information about their quantity. So we have a lot of tools that we can use so that we can carry out measuring. I'm sure you're familiar with the clock, the tape measure, this new gadget that came in because of the corona so that you can measure temperature of people, the ruler for measuring lengths. This you'll find inside the car so that you can measure the speed at which the car is moving. A thermometer, usually this is what you have in the homes, so I can measure the temperature inside of the place. And this one is usually for measuring the amount of voltage in electrical gadgets. So for measuring, it's simply tools or the action that we're doing so that we can be sure of the quantity of something that we are having. So we make different kinds of measurements in everyday life. We measure length, we measure area, we measure time, and we also measure mass. So for each of these, we're going to look at what tools do we use to help us so that we can measure these quantities. So once again, we're going to look at length, area, time, and mass. So let's start with temperature. There is an activity we're going to look at. It says telling how hot or cold something is by using our sense of touch. So how do we go about it? I got this picture from the science book, the grade 7 science book. You can see you have 3 containers labeled A, B, C. And when we look at instruction, briefly it is saying in one of them, you're putting water at normal temperature, like water you get from the tap, which is about room temperature. And in one, you are having very hot, or not very, very hot, because you have to be careful so you don't burn your skin. You have hot water. And then the other one is warm water. That is water that is of a higher temperature than the water you normally collect from the tap. Okay? So we have cold water, we have warm water, and then we have hot water. So let's look at the description. It says filled A with cold water, B with warm water, and C with hot water respectively. So if I should take you back, this is cold water, warm water, and hot water. So what do we do? It says dip your left hand into the water C. Leave it there for a few minutes. Then immediately put it into the water B. Now if you remember, C is the hot water and B is the warm water. So first you place your hand in C, which is the hot water, and when you take it from there, you now dip it into B, which is the warm water. And how does it feel? It says write down how the water in B feels. Next, it says now dip your right hand into the water A, then into, oh sorry about that typing error, water B. How does the water in B feel? Going back to the diagram, you have to put your hand in the cold water, and when you immediately take it out, put it in B, which is supposed to be the warm water. And the question now is, how does it feel? And you're doing this simultaneously. So when you start, your left hand goes into the hot water, your right hand into the cold water, and then you bring both of them into the warm water. And the question is, how does it feel? Does the second observation agree with the first? How do we explain this observation? Because looking at it, it's a bit interesting. From hot water, when you place your hand in the warm water, you should be able to feel warm. But is that really what you feel? And from the cold water, you go to warm water. You're moving from cold to warm. Is that what you really felt? But when you do it, the two together, what do you feel? The fun thing about this is the brain is working in conjunction with the activities you're doing. So at this stage, you're confusing the senses that are going to the brain, because the brain is receiving mixed information. You've moved from hot to warm and from cold to warm. So how does the brain interpret this? So if you try this at home, you'll find it interesting. But do be careful with the hot water. Make sure it is something your hand can contain. Let it not be water that is going to burn your skin. We need to use other means to aid our senses, because from this experiment here, you will know you cannot rely on your sense of feel, because if your hand is coming from something hot and going to something warm, your brain will interpret that as cold. Likewise, if your hand is coming from cold water onto warm water, it is going to interpret that as hot. But then if you now move your hand from cold and hot at the same time and dip them into warm water, then you get confused. So instruments that help us measure quantities more accurately is what we're looking at. And so it's asking you, can you think of one? Yes, I'm sure you remember the thermometer. Thermometer come in different style nowadays, but the one that we've been using in the laboratories is a glass tube, and then inside this tube you have another smaller tube, and then you have a liquid that is placed there. Two of the most common liquids are mercury and alcohol. They all have the advantages and disadvantages. So what happens is, this point is what you make sure it is inside the object whose temperature you want to take. If it is, for example, the hot water, this part goes into the hot water, it will hit the mercury. And if you remember or recall from our talk about matter, when matter is heated, the particles are going to move away from each other and take more space. So that is what is causing this line to rise up according to the amount of heat that it is receiving. So it can tell you how much heat energy is found in that material. So for length, a good scientist should be good at estimating distances and lengths. At the end of this lesson, try estimating distances and lengths of a book, a brick, a window, and a door. So simply, you look at, we're trying to say as a scientist, you should be able to estimate distances. It's interesting sometimes you ask somebody, can you show me 1 meter? And the amount of space they give you doesn't correlate with a meter. So a good scientist should be able to estimate something and be not accurate, but very close to the right figures. So suitable instruments for measuring lengths would include different types of tape measure here. This one you'll find mostly with people that do construction. This one is common among tailors, and of course the ruler that we use in the classroom for both students and of course the teachers, they have their own rulers as well. So for measuring lengths and distances, we have this instrument. For longer distance, they have other equipment that they'll be using. For example, you want to know the distance from here, Serekunda here, up to Banjul, you're not going to be using these small tools. There's another equipment they will be using for that one. And still on length, measuring volume of regular objects. Now remember, volume is simply by measuring different lengths of the object. So you need to measure the length, the breadth, and the height of the object. Now, once you have those ones, then you'll be able to indicate the volume of the regular object. Now, take note, we're referring to regular object. That means objects that have straight edges. The length is a straight line, the breadth, the height, these are all straight lines. So when you have those ones, like the example we're having here, we can measure the volume. So what is volume? It's simply the amount of space that matter occupies. It is measured in milliliters. Some use centimeter cubes, right? And you can see 1 milliliter is the same as 1 cubic meter. Now, you must be able to know the relationship between the milliliter and the liter. And of course, we have a measuring cylinder that we'll be using to measure the volume of liquid. Here we have a container with a regular sides. So calculating volume of regular object, to find the volume of a regular box-shaped object, you can measure its sides and multiply its measurement. So the volume, the formula is simply the length multiplied by the width multiplied by the height. So you have the height, the length, and the width. So once you have measured those ones, then all you have to do now is to multiply them, and then you have your figure. Measurements have units, so you also multiply the units. And let's say if you were using centimeters, so you're going to have centimeter multiplied by centimeter multiplied by centimeter. And that will give you centimeter cube. Now, what would happen if the object is not a regular object, meaning it is irregular, or in simple terms, the sides are not uniform, they are not having straight line. So to find the volume of an irregular object, you are going to need a graduated cylinder or a measuring cylinder. And you also need to be careful here. How do you read the volume of the liquid? You can see this guy trying to go down so that the level of his eyes are the same with the level of the water. And also you must know something about something we call meniscus. Now, water forms a little curve. Now, when you're reading from the bottom of the curve. It will be wrong if you stand on top of the beaker and you want to read, the figure is going to be wrong. Likewise, if you go down too much and the cylinder rather, not the beaker, if you stand above the cylinder and you want to read, you're going to have wrong figures. If you go down too much also, the figures are not going to be right. So you must be at your eye level must be at the level of the liquid whose volume you're trying to measure. So to find the volume of this object, we have something that is shaped like a diamond. We said you're using the measuring cylinder. It says pour water into a graduated cylinder. Record the amount of water. Okay, so here, the first time the water stopped here. Place the object into the graduated cylinder. All right, we do that. And now you record measurement of water level after the object was submerged or placed in. So you can see the level has risen. And the picture is showing us here that the first reading was here. And now the second reading you can see there. So that is the volume of the object that was placed in there. So how do you find that? You simply say subtract original water volume from the ending water volume. Whatever figure you have here, in this case it was 600, you subtract it from what you have here, which is about 780, and then you have your volume. So this is how you find the volume of a regular object. What are the steps? First, take a measuring cylinder, put water there. Take note of the volume. Then you place the object, you take note of the second volume. You subtract the first reading or the first volume from the second volume, and that gives you the volume of the object whose volume you're trying to calculate. So more pictures to help us understand this. Measuring the volume of irregular objects using measuring cylinder, like we said. first measure the volume of the liquid, place the object, now record the second, and it's simply, we have the V1 representing first volume, V2 representing second volume. So the volume of the object, which is Vx, is simply second volume minus the first volume. And if you learn it that way, there's no room for mistake. So here's an example. The volume of the water was 30 milliliters. After dropping the diamond in the graduated cylinder, the total volume increased by 46. So now we're going to subtract the final volume. We're subtracting the initial volume from the final volume. So that is 46 minus 30, and we're left with 16. So we know the volume of the object is 16 milliliters. And for time, we have some objects. In the past, they were using these objects to measure the time. Here is a pendulum, which is simply a metal ball that is tied to a string, and you hang it freely and let it swing from one end to the other, and that will help you to count the number of times it is going, and then you know how many times it has swung. The hourglass, it is so designed that the sun that is in it will all pour down from one end to the other, and it takes exactly a certain time that it is designed for, if it is for a minute or if it is for an hour, and so on. And then you have this one that will cast a shadow that is aligned with the, the face of the board has been divided into 12 hours or whatever number of hours they had in those days. And it's placed at a strategic place so that when the sun is moving, the shadow will be located at different points. And with that, they're able to tell time. Today, we're using instruments like the watch, the clock, or even the stopwatch so that we can measure time as it is going. They are much more comfortable, convenient. You can easily move around with them, and they're a little bit more accurate in measuring time. But for highly accurate measurement of time, the atomic clock is used. I will not go into the detail of how that works, but just to let you know that we have different devices for measuring time. And this says for something much more accurate, they're using the atomic clock. Mass and weight. Mass is simply how much matter, how much stuff that you have in an object. And we measure mass in grams, or we measure them also in kilograms. By now you should be familiar with the relationship between grams and the kilogram. 1,000 grams make up 1 kilogram. And we have different tools for measuring mass. This is an electronic device, electronic balance. So once you put the apple, it will give you the mass of the object. And weight, on the other hand, we say it's a measure of the force of gravity on an object. Weight is measured in newtons. Why are we looking at weight? Because we often confuse mass and weight. On Earth, all objects are attracted to the center of Earth by the force of gravity. And that force of gravity can be more or less on other areas like space or the moon and so on. So depending on the size of those objects. So therefore, what we're trying to say here is weight can vary depending on the object that is attracting our materials, whereas mass remains the same. It doesn't change. We are almost done. We're looking at common scientific apparatus, and you are required to know their names. They are done in a simple way for you to be able to draw them. And interestingly, you are expected also to be able to name them and state their uses. So I deliberately didn't put the uses here. I want you to go and, as a homework, go and find out the uses of this instrument. We have a test tube, the beaker, larger beaker, small beaker. We have a filter funnel, a conical flask, a measuring cylinder, the Bunsen burner, and We have a clamp stand, others will call it retort stand. Have the tripod stand and the thermometer. So these are all apparatus that we use. There is more on this side. We have a lot of them. The ones I've not named yet would include the microscope and this one for measuring the pH of substances, how acidic or how alkaline they are. So you need to find out the names of all of these and what they are used for. So let us end by saying thank you for patiently waiting on, going with me through the lesson. And until we meet again, I am Mr. Quraish. Thank you.